There are some holidays that I don't go to work, and not necessarily that I think are good holidays for us to celebrate. I will not go into that of what those are. But there is one holiday that I absolutely enjoy, even though I don't go participate in a lot of their festivities. But I think it's because, first of all, what it honors, and that they have not changed it to a Monday, because I'm going to tell you in a minute what it really means for it to be on the 11th of November. But Veterans Day is something that I did not have to go. I grew up in the late 60s, early 70s, when the Vietnam War was still going on. I was very fortunate that while I was in college, I don't remember the day, but I remember where I was when we heard them say they're pulling troops out and we have shut down the Vietnam War. At that time, all of us sort of had a little bit of sigh of relief. But then people like Brother Horn went, and I appreciate his doing that as well. But Veterans Day has a great meaning, or should have a great meaning for us in America, for what that it means. In 1921, an unknown World War I soldier was brought back and buried in the Arlington National Cemetery. This site, on the hillside overlooking the Potomac River and the city of Washington, D.C., became the focal point of reverence for the American veterans. I thought it was really neat, and I'm doing a sidebar here, but I thought it was really neat because when Jonathan's grandmother, Mrs. Bates, they had her funeral, they did not have an intermittent interment as there would be, because she was shipped to Arlington National Cemetery and was buried there along when Brother Bates passes away. That will go. I think that's neat. I really do. And that's just on the sidebar there, but when hearing that, I thought was really great. Similar ceremonies also went on in France and in England, and they had it here in America, and all of it was to honor, and these memorial gestures all took place, and they took place on November the 11th, giving the universal recognition to the celebrating of the end of World War I, 11 a.m. on November 11th, 1918. The day became known as, anybody know? Armistice Day. And the reason that it was Armistice Day and has officially received its name in America, and it did that in 1926, and they did this with the fact to celebrate in World War I was to be the wars that ended all wars, and there was not supposed to ever be another war. Well, of course, after that, 12 years that they actually made the possibility of it being Armistice Day. But then, of course, come along the European conflict in the late 30s and the early 40s that we know as World War II. If World War I was the war to end all wars, what happened? Well, people got selfish again. If you've been here in Sunday school this morning, you'd have heard that, as she talked about how the selfishness and so forth. But then we had the Korean War. And in the late 50s, Dwight Eisenhower then changed Armistice Day to Veterans Day to honor all veterans on that day. And that is the one thing, the one holiday that we as government employees do not celebrate on Monday to have a long weekend. It is actually celebrated on November the 1st or the 11th, because that was the end of World War I. And as we remember those who have died protecting our freedoms, and the message today will have a Veterans Day theme throughout it, I have a lot of reading today, and I apologize for that, but I have it because there's a lot of things in there that I want to bring out to you. But in this Veterans Day, in the honor of our veterans and the freedoms that we have and that we know, the same time we will explore what it means to be the member of the army of God, soldiers of the cross. The freedoms we enjoy today include the freedom to move around any place that we want to go wherever we want to for church. All of those freedoms, even for people that don't believe in God in America today, has the freedom to believe that. Oops. But they do. That freedom is being given because we have, and we were founded on religious freedom. And we are free moral agents, and because we are free moral agents, people have a right to do that. I don't think they have the right to try to place all of those on us. And whether we have right to place it on those people is the fact that we just tell them the truth. Because we do have the truth on our side, right? But they have those freedoms to do so. We have a freedom to come here. We have a freedom to do whatever we want to do. And every once in a while, during these conflicts, something happens and a soldier does something extraordinary, and it goes beyond the regular call of duty, and they are called the Medals of Honor. I want to just shortly mention two different people that received the Medal of Honor. One was for the Korean conflict, and the other one was for the Japanese conflict in World War II. But George Libby was a soldier that in the Korean War, and while they were encamped around by the enemy began to come down upon them, and all of the soldiers all around there was wounded except Libby. Libby started working to try to get them all taken care of, but he couldn't go very far because he was all under fire. And then here come along a ammunition tractor, and as the ammunition tractor come by, he got on it. And he started loading all of the wounded soldiers on it, and they were heading through enemy fire. And as they were doing it, he realized that there was nobody else able to actually be able to drive the tractor except the driver. So what he did is he got between the enemy fire and the driver of the tractor, and as they went through the enemies, of course, he was hit several times and killed. But those wounded people were able to make it through to safety and taken care of. Good reason for there to be a Medal of Honor there. He gave his life that others would be able to make it. Then there was another gentleman named Munoz that was in the Japanese conflict, and they were taken what was known as Higgins boats, and they had 24 of them that they were taken through to try to evacuate a battalion of 500 Marines. So how they had to do that was they had to go through the enemy to get to the Marines to come back. And the only way that he could do that was to take his gunner boat that he had 2 guns on it, and get between the island where those people were and the enemy. During that time, he was killed. But they were able to move all of those gunner boats through and be able to make it on the other side. And he gallantly gave his life for his country so that those people could make it through. There are many, many stories like that that could be told. And I have no doubt that each time in the days and the weeks that followed all of those heroics, people worked harder because of their fallen comrades that this had happened to. In a small town in the Middle East that we know as Bethlehem, there was a hero that was born. Not a lot of people knew who he was at the time, and not a lot of people thought that the character of all the things that could be there in place. But we know as his name is Jesus, And he was the son of Joseph the carpenter. And he grew up, and we didn't hear a lot about him as a hero at the very first part of it. We know that we have the story of the Bethlehem birth. We also have the story of them leaving and going into Egypt and then coming back. And we know that he was raised in Nazareth. And all those things that go along with it. But the first time we really heard anything is when he was a young lad and they came to pay their taxes, and he had left and he started talking to the doctors and the lawyers and all those things. But we never heard a lot about him until he became an adult. But who would have really expected him to have been the hero that he was? Because most people would say, all right, he was born of Mary, and Mary became expecting before she was married to Joseph and all those things. There could have been all kinds of things to be said about the situation. But God knew what was best. God knew what he needed to take care of. And God made it worthwhile. But we also know that he did not come triumphantly when he came through. Yes, he was born, and we celebrate that, but there was no great praise because he wasn't in a palace. Where was he when he was born? Where did they put him? In a manger, in a stable. Isaiah told us that that was what was going to take place, and he was mentioning that, but also Philippians 2 tells us, who being in the form of God, thought it not robbery to be equal with God, but made himself of no reputation, took upon him the form of a servant, and was made in the likeness of men. To begin with, like the soldiers I described earlier, Jesus put himself in harm's way. He endured pain and suffering for the benefit of others. Then in Isaiah 53 we read, who hath believed our report, and to whom is the arm of the Lord revealed? For he shall grow up before him as a tender plant, and as a root of dry ground. He shall have no form nor comeliness, and when we shall see him, there is no beauty that we should desire him. He is despised and rejected of men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. He hath hid, as it were, our faces from him, and he was despised, and we esteemed him not. And he did all of that willingly. The difference between him and the other soldiers was they did not know what the outcome was going to be when they left. They knew that they needed to do what was best or what they thought was best. Jesus already knew what the outcome was going to be. He already knew the pain and the agony that he was going to suffer, yet he was willing to do it anyway. And Isaiah continues, he was oppressed, he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. He is brought as a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before her shears is dumb. He openeth not his mouth. He was taken from prison and from judgment, and who shall declare his generation? For he was cut off out of the land of the living, for the transgression of my people was he stricken. No hero ever in the history of anything can ever come close to the hero that we have in Jesus Christ. Because not only did he take care of the things that of the physical that we did this morning, but also of the spiritual. Matthew records in his gospel, no, not one time will you find where Jesus responded to his pain and suffering with any other word than, not my will, but thine be done. And in the case of these petty officers that lost their lives, Jesus was willing to endure this pain on the behalf of his people to the point of death. Paul continues in Philippians chapter in verse 8, and being found in the fashion as man, he humbled himself and became obedient unto death, even death on the cross. Wherefore God also hath highly exalted himself and given him the name which is above every other name. Paul also describes for us in Romans chapter 5 verse 7, for scarcely shall a righteous man will one die, yet peradventure for a good man some would even dare to die. But God commended His love toward us, that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. And it's at this point, however, that the comparison of these other soldiers falls short, because Christ didn't die just for our physical here on this earth. He died to give victory over death, hell, and the grave. And what's going to live on is not our mortal bodies that we have here of this flesh and blood. What's going to live somewhere, sometime, are our souls. And Jesus came to save our souls. I thought surely I would find a shout in this. Just like in war, when they would try to take a battle and take a hill or take a body of water or even take a country, which was a great thing to be able to position themselves in the right place, Jesus was able to do something greater than that. He took back the liberties. He took back our souls. He took back our life and brought life back to the human race that had been lost in death because of Adam's sin. In that victory, in that sacrifice, Jesus, like the two soldiers, should inspire us to witness, to talk, and to do whatever we need to do to glorify His name and let other people know about Him. In 1 Peter chapter 3 we read, "But sanctify the Lord God in your hearts, and be ready always to give an answer to every man that asketh you the reason of the hope that is in you with meekness and in fear." And later on in that letter, in verse 17, Peter writes, For it is better, if the will of God be so, that you suffer for well-doing than for evil-doing. Christ also hath once suffered for sin, the just for the unjust, that He might bring us to God, being put to death in the flesh, but quickened in the Spirit. And the clearest and the dynamic example of how Christ died and His resurrection should inspire us to tell other people about. I'm not finished when I ask this question, but I will ask this question. Is Jesus your hero today? In spite of the wide assortment of issues that have created problems, the fact remains that America still is considered one of the most powerful, well-equipped armies and that we have, even though that has been deteriorated greatly from what it was previously. We need to be honest with ourselves and understand that America is vulnerable. Y'all hear what I said? We have fought among ourselves. We have made ourselves divided. And as I did the pledge, sometimes I have to wonder, is that as true as it used to be? But I'm here to tell you this morning, America is vulnerable. But the plan of God, the plan of salvation, and Jesus Christ has no vulnerabilities whatsoever in it. It's rock solid, it's sound, it's pure, it's holy, it's righteous, and even though the enemy will try to attack it, yes, the enemy may even have some casualties along the way, and we may be wounded in some way, but we do know one thing. Victory is ours through Jesus Christ. And as Christians, we can assume that on the spiritual front, this story is that we will be strong. Ephesians 6 tells us, and this is one of my favorite verses, I've probably mentioned this in this pulpit more than I have in anything else in the last 10 years, and that is, for we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against the principalities, against the powers, against the rulers of darkness of this world, against the spiritual wickedness in high places. And in 13 through 18, Paul paints this beautiful picture and a graphic picture which describes the armor of God for us to be able to handle these. Therefore, it says, take unto you the whole armor of God, that you may be able to withstand the evil day, and having done all to stand. Stand therefore, having your loins girded about with truth, and having on the breastplate of righteousness, and your feet shod with the preparation of the gospel of peace, and above all taking the shield of faith, wherewith you shall be able to quench all fiery darts of the devil, of the wicked. And take the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the Word of God, praying always with prayer and supplication in spirit, and watching thereunto with all perseverance and supplication of all the saints. How important is that? We're in a battle, friends. And in that battle, He gives us what we need to be able to make it through that battle. There's a story told of a soldier who lived with confidence even as he found himself in the heat of the battle. It was another battle in Korea, and the one gentleman at Heartbreak Ridge was taken down, and all the rest of them were down in their foxholes with enemy fire all around, and they were wondering which one was going to be able to go and take care of that soldier that was wounded. And for a while, no one would move. The men in the foxholes could hear their wounded friend yelling for help. Then one of the men in the foxhole began to look intensely at his own watch. He could not take his eyes off of it, and the others in the foxholes noticed it and wondered, and they began to ask questions, but the soldier remained silent. And all of a sudden, the man with his watch jumped out of the foxhole, crawled over into to his wounded buddy. He grabbed him by the nape of the collar, slowly brought him back to the foxhole, and all the while the sniper fire was whizzing everywhere around. And they asked him, they said, when you come back, said, why did it take you so long to go? To which he responded, my mom said every day, exactly at the same time, she would be praying for me. And according to my watch, I left the foxhole exactly when she started praying. We may not always receive the answers to the prayers with such a dynamic fashion, but there's one thing that we can know, that one of the greatest weapons that we have in this world today is prayer. Mothers, pray for your children. Children, pray for your mothers and fathers. And all of that we can do. As far as this life goes today, we're going to lose the battle of the flesh. Okay? But there's a battle that we don't have to lose, and that is the battle for our freedom from sin. Jesus has already been victorious with that. His commandment to our spiritual freedom and to our salvation is something that we can hold on to and believe, because He has already won the battle. It is His. And the question is, are we willing to serve in that war? We can be confident in our daily faith battles that God will be there to help and be with us. And if we don't believe that, we don't believe in Jesus Christ. He will help us, and He will take us through. Veterans Day should mean a lot to all of us because of what we're here about today. We can do this because, but even more so and greater than the celebration of the lost lives and the heroic acts of our military, the heroic act that Jesus Christ did in the war of eternity. victory is ours because of Him.